Welcome, everybody. So today we have Callie Chapman with us. She is the Business Relationship Manager and Talent Solution Supervisor for one of the top 10 privately held companies. Callie, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to go through and be asking a couple of questions here, kind of helping our viewers better navigate some of the bigger companies that are out there and some of the things that you've seen, maybe add some advice. And before we do that, if you don't mind, Callie, if you could kind of just share with us your story, how you got to where you're at now, and then go from there.
Sure. So I honestly can say I've probably been in some form of HR role since I was about 16. My first job was as an HR intern in the personnel office for New York State Department of Correctional Services, if you can believe that. And so my job has always been in some HR role, form, or function, whether it's benefits or just typing up letters. But I got into recruiting maybe about 15 years ago, and I started out as a recruiting specialist. And I got into being a recruiter because I was nosy and wanted to know what everybody else was doing. So by asking questions, they are kind of like, well, do you want to just do this job? And I said, sure. So I started recruiting for call center individuals and kind of progressed from there, and have worked for large retailers, and now I'm working for a large manufacturer. And I supervise a team of about 8 recruiters.
That's awesome. Very cool. So New York Department of Corrections, huh? That must have been interesting.
It really was, and I'm not ashamed to say my dad was a commissioner, so he needed help in the personnel office and was like, my daughter can do it, and so that's kind of how I got the job.
That's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So speaking of family, if you were speaking to one of your family members and they were trying to get into your company where you work, what suggestions would you give them to kind of best increase their odds of securing an interview with you?
Sure. Well, funny thing is, my sister is actually going through the process, so it's not too far fetched. But some of the things that I talk to her about are making sure that you have thoroughly read the job description, making sure that you have a point of view on the company, a point of view on why you're interested in working there, and making sure that your resume reflects truly what that company is looking for. So if you are out there looking for a role, it may make sense for you to have a couple of different versions of your resume, because not everybody's job is one dimensional. So, if you have a job that requires marketing aspects, but you're applying to a marketing job, you probably want to highlight those aspects of your role. Right. So I talked to my sister about making sure her resume reflects the company, that she's done her research, that she has a clear point of view on what she's looking for from a compensation perspective, whether it's base or total, and really understanding from the company why she would want to work there. I try and tell people that it's an interview not only with that company deciding, or you deciding if you want to work with that company, but it's also vice versa. So making sure that you are well prepared to get there. And the things, honestly, to make your resume stand out to get an interview is literally having those items that the company is looking for on the resume. So, if you see call outs for certain technologies and you have that, make sure you call those out on your resume, because recruiters are scanning resumes probably maybe 30 seconds. So you have 30 seconds to make an impression. So they're scanning, they're looking for those different kind of keywords to say, oh, okay, this person is somebody I should move into the, consider further pile. And if they don't see it, depending on the amount of candidates that they have, they may not have time to go back and ask if you have those skills. So highlight it as much as you can.
No, that's a great point. And I know that, when you talk to people about resumes, because part of what we do is help coach folks on their resumes, that it's a living, breathing document. Like, you're never going to have a 100% approved solution that's going to be one size fits all. And so that's a great point of tailoring it to what the role is. I mean, the job description's there, highlight what you've done, So let me know how it goes with your sister, though. I'm interested to see how that works out for her.
Will do.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. So what does your company look for when hiring? I mean, do you guys recommend candidates going directly to the hiring manager after they've applied? Are you guys looking for cultural fit, previous experience? Do you guys promote internally? What do you guys look for?
So, of course, ideally, we always are looking for the skills and knowledge. So we do want to make sure that that person has at least those baseline skills and knowledge. So if you're looking at a job description, those basic qualifications. And then the preferred are nice. But the other side is definitely cultural fit. So we want to make sure that that person has done their research around our organization and understand what our values are, because we want to make sure that an individual is aligned in those values. I mean, you think about, somebody that's applying for a financial job and they stole some money, probably not.
An issue.
Right. The probably values are not necessarily aligned there.
Right.
So culture fit is definitely important. And I think it should be important for the candidate as well, because, there are certain organizations where, maybe the work-life balance isn't there, or, what they see as success may not be aligned with what you see as success. So making sure you do your research there. And then, I got on a tangent, and then what were the other two areas?
No problem. It's previous experience in the industry. Is that a big alignment too for you guys, or sometimes are you open on that?
It all depends on the role. So, if it's a highly technical role, most likely they probably would want somebody with some form of industry experience, but it's not a necessity in every case. So I definitely would say for individuals, paying attention to that job description, and if you see industry experience is in that basic qualification, that's a need to have for that job. And if it's a preferred, that's just the plus. So if you don't have that industry experience and it's a requirement for the role, most likely you may not be the best fit. And there's usually a reason behind why that's needed. And so we do try and vet that out as well when we're putting job descriptions together.
Gotcha. And then what about going to hiring managers? Is that something, because I know, depending on the organization, I know you guys have a very robust internal recruiting department. If there's a relationship or a connection with the hiring manager, is that a positive, or is it really focused on trying to keep through the recruiting channels?
I think it varies. I mean, if the candidate has a relationship with the hiring supervisor already, I don't necessarily see any harm with them reaching out to that person. But eventually, all avenues usually do flow through that recruiter in most companies. So there will be some interaction, whether that hiring supervisor redirects you.
Right.
And it's all about approach as well. I think that, however you approach that hiring supervisor with your interest is also going to be important. So just, whether it's understanding that individual is busy, or, hey, sorry to bother you, just wanted to ask a question, as opposed to I demand you tell me where I am with this job, or you give me this job. Of course, that's probably not going to be the best impression.
No, the best is I love, and I'm sure you get it, is I'm a perfect fit for this position. And you're like, no, you're not, because you got maybe 10% of what really is the requirements in the job description. So I always appreciate that email or voice message of, hey, here you go. I'm a perfect fit for this job. And I'm like, geez, no, you're not. So
yeah.
Gotcha. And two, I think you bring up a great point. I mean, if you're going to reach out to somebody, the hiring manager, because you have a relationship, hey, I got a couple of questions, or hey, I just wanted to make sure you had my resume. Hey, just want to make sure you didn't have any follow-on questions to what my application was, kind of approach is a much better way of getting out of it. So,
agree.
Good point. Good point. Kelly, how have you seen COVID-19 impact the hiring process at your organization?
So impacts to the hiring process mainly has just been when we get to the on-site interview piece. So during a pandemic in, kind of the locations of our facilities, usually people do have to travel to get there. We don't really have a lot of local candidates. So what we've been doing to kind of work with COVID, because you can't really combat it, you got to work with it, is we do virtual interviews in replacement of the on-site interview. And then if necessary, if we have a candidate where they've never been to that location before, we may do a site visit for those final candidates so they can see the location and decide if it's the right fit for themselves and their family.
Gotcha. So then have you seen that kind of push the timeline out? Or has it been pretty much in line with the hiring pre-COVID-19?
Honestly, it's made it a little bit faster. And that's really because if you're having a candidate travel, they've got to take time off of work. It usually can't be the same week. It's usually, scheduled a week or two out. Where with COVID, we can a lot of times do multiple interviews across a few days, which is also helpful for a candidate where they're not taking a day off. Maybe they're using their lunch break or, some scheduled time that they have free during the day. So we may be able to schedule, a 3-hour interview that may take one day over 3 days and just spread it out a little bit.
Nice. That's interesting. I would assume, and I'm glad you brought that up, that it would actually lengthen the time frame of the hiring process, but in your case, it's actually decreasing it. So That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And then, what would you suggest to someone to help them differentiate themselves from everyone else that's applying? Is there anything that you've seen successful, or?
I definitely would say shy away from the buzzwords of like great communication skills. Everybody says that. And some of those things like, talking about maybe like organization or you're a people person, those are things that everybody has on their resumes. So the way that you can stand out is probably by not having that information there and really like sticking to the facts and the information. Recruiters love to interact with individuals, and the pleasantries are great, but for a first introduction, stick to the facts, stick to the qualifications that you have for the role. And I will say, if it's a creative role, we have some designer positions, and individuals may submit their portfolio along with their resume. That can help an individual stand out for a role that may require some like technical capabilities. But from a resume, I think it's reflecting what the role is looking for. That's important. Having information that is relevant to your experience. Like a lot of people like to put hobbies and, they're an avid hunter or things like that, which is great, but probably not necessarily relevant to you, getting a superintendent role. So, keeping your resume focused on the position you're applying for and making sure it's concise and appropriate.
Gotcha. Perfect. And then here's a question that's come up. So we've done surveys over the last year and a half. One survey, we had like 60,000 people that we sent it out to, got a great response. Another one, we had like almost 80,000. And cover letters comes up consistently. Do we use them? Do we not? For me personally, I don't read them. Some of the people that we did this broadcast for, that we had this discussion, people were like, oh my gosh, what do you mean? I put so much time into the cover letter. I'm like, I'm sorry. I don't have time to read your cover letter. Like your 6 pages that you're giving me, it doesn't matter to me. So I guess internally, do you read them? Do you coach to read them? Like, what's your opinions on them? Not to get you too.
No, you're fine. I'm sorry to break anybody's heart, but recruiters don't really read them.
Yeah, thank you.
Hiring supervisors do sometimes. I have seen them. If they're attached, they'll read it. But I would say if you do have a cover letter, make sure your cover letter is on point, because we have seen some where the cover letter has misspelled, mistakes, or, the person forgets to change their applying to, say Lowe's, but they kept the Home Depot, cover letter information on there. So, if you're going to do one, make sure your cover letter is wrapped up. But I feel like if you're going to invest your time, invest in your resume. That's truly going to paint the picture of who you are, and you have the capability of selling yourself during your interview to the candidate. I mean, to the recruiter and the hiring supervisor. So you can do what that cover letter is doing, but you could do that verbally, and that's going to have the most impact.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's just, internal or external. I don't have time to read everybody's. I mean, I'm looking at the resume for the facts and how you align and moving on from there. And you're actually gracious. I mean, 30 seconds for what you mentioned earlier. I don't even think we do that. I mean, I've looked at so many of these things. It takes me about 15 seconds to figure out I'm talking to this person or I'm not, or they're or are we putting them in our applicant tracking system? I'm just going to save them for later kind of a thing. So awesome.
So I always tell candidates or people that I'm working with, think of it as like your resume is almost like your online dating profile. Like you want to make sure that it is attractive. You want to make sure that it paints yourself in the best light. You want to make sure that you're putting yourself as an ideal mate out there for somebody. And then when you get to the date, or in this case, the interview, that's when you get to truly like highlight yourself. So making sure that you are valuing that recruiter and hiring supervisor's time and literally sticking to what they're looking for, which is this person qualified for the role, yes or no?
And making sure that you're using factual information and not putting a picture from you from 30 years ago.
Fair point. No catfishing. No catfishing.
No catfishing, exactly. So in all your years of doing this, I mean, you've got to have a kind of a funny story or a situation that sticks out with you. Is there something you could share with us, just kind of on the, maybe something that you recall or story?
So it's probably more of a candidate situation, but this was a couple of companies ago, maybe in like my first corporate role, and we had this person that was coming to interview for a pretty important role, and the person was flying in, and he showed up to the interview with what I would call a business mullet. He was like business on the top. He had a suit, he had a tie, he had a jacket on and everything, and he had sweatpants on the bottom.
Come on.
No, he showed up to his interview with a suit on the top and sweatpants on the bottom. And when we asked him what happened, he said he was walking with his garment bag with his suit in it, and he tripped and fell into some mud, and he got mud on his dress pants. So he went to Walmart, and apparently the best thing that he could find was sweatpants. And we were just thinking there were no khakis or
like something.
Nothing.
Wow.
Just from a from a critical thinking standpoint, we were a little concerned. But that's probably one of the craziest interviews I have dealt with.
Sweatpants on the bottom. That's great.
Yes.
That's great. And I really appreciate the candor, Callie, and the time that you shared with us. There was one thing that you and I discussed previously that I thought was a really great point about interviewing that I did want to kind of bring up. You and I were talking about candidates being prepared with questions, yes. Right? Something that you've differentiated, and we had a great dialogue about that, but can you share that a little bit, kind of like what your thoughts are on questions and stuff, being prepared, going back to being prepared and differentiating yourself from interviews?
Yes, I think candidates that come to the interview with questions, you get so much farther in the feedback that I get from hiring supervisors. Like, that person has some really good questions. And like I was telling you, my favorite is when somebody stumps me with a question and I'm like, well, geez, I didn't even think about that. Like, let me get back to you. But the questions that you can find on a website are if you want to know about benefits and you want to know about vacation, like those are important, but like really take the time and really get some thoughtful questions. Like, what kind of metrics am I going to be held to? What does good look like for an individual? What did the last person in the role have that made them successful? What is the learning curve? how is performance measured? Is it strictly by metrics, or is it by projects? What is the career path? What are the next roles that I can go into if I was selected for the role? Those are things that are really helpful, and for um, the business or the hiring supervisor to really know that you've done your research and that you are truly interested. If you see a news article about the organization, maybe there was a big acquisition with that company, and you may want to ask, hey, I saw you just acquired XYZ company. How would that affect my role, or would that have any effect in my role? So no, like that, the companies want to know that you have done your research and you're just not, a person that's looking for a job. They want to make sure that you are coming there looking for a career, and ultimately looking to be a good representative for that company.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And if you are Googling what questions to ask during an interview, so is everyone else. And those exact questions are going to be like, we know those questions, right? I mean,
Yep.
so that's really not a big differentiator. But the ones that actually are ones that you have to think about, that have put some forethought into it, those are the ones that are really, I think, do differentiate yourself from the hiring supervisor as well as a recruiter in the discussions. So awesome.
Yep.
Now,
Yep. And if Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna say one more thing.
Yeah.
And if you're interviewing with multiple people, spread those questions out. Like, hey, I'm gonna ask 2 questions of this person, or make it relevant to that person's role. Like, if you're interviewing with an accountant, probably not a good idea to ask them about like the safety at a facility. They may not know that, but they could tell you about the budget. So also paying attention to your audience and tailoring it there. So
that's great advice. Awesome. Kelly, is there anything else you'd like to add, or before we wrap up today?
The only thing I would say is, I know a lot of people get frustrated with finding roles, and there seems to be a mystery of like, how do I make myself stand out into a hole of where everybody else is jumping into? And I always say that if the role is meant for you, it's meant for you, and it's going to work itself out. So, you may get frustrated maybe because you weren't selected, and just know that role just may not be the right one for you. And that's okay. The job that you need or you want is out there. You just have to find it. And sometimes it's about timing. So also being patient. We know people have bills to pay, but you want to make a selection that is going to be for the right career path for you and what you want to do. So making sure that you're thoughtful with how you're selecting your roles is important.
That's great advice. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So,
exactly.
Kelly, thanks so much. I really appreciate the time. It was nice to finally meet you face to face, and look forward to working with you on future opportunities.
Same. All right. Thanks.
Kelly.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.